Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, India's largest platform for entrepreneurs. We bring you expert advice on how to make and manage your money right, how to hire right, anything and everything, in fact, to do with the life of an entrepreneur covered here on the show. It gives me great pleasure tonight to welcome in live from New York, someone who's very well known when it comes to his views on the Indian economy as well as policy matters. Arvind Panagariya joining us tonight. So thank you for taking the time to speak to us here on the Leaders of Tomorrow.
Pleasure to be here.
I want to start with a message, if I may, for entrepreneurs who are watching tonight's interview. The overarching theme that we're working with here on Leaders of Tomorrow is empowering a billion dreams. If you had one message that you'd like to kickstart today's interview with, what would it be?
Well, absolutely. I think, we are coming out of COVID, and the post-COVID decade is going to be a major developmental decade for India. It will grow very rapidly in this decade. And so I think it is a great time, the dreams of the entrepreneurs to come to have a play and contribute to India's development.
We've been speaking with some of the biggest experts, whether it is the MOS for MSME, the CA, the principal advisor, all of them telling us that we've started seeing the first shoots of recovery. In fact, going so far as to say that it's not just shoots, but it's stems of recovery, that we've progressed beyond Q1 and Q2, the kind of struggle that we really saw in the economy, and that we're seeing growth really coming back. I'd like to get your views on that.
That is correct. We are certainly seeing signs of recovery, even going from the quarter that was April to June to the next one, which is July to September. We have seen that the GDP decline that had been 24% is now down to about 7.5%. And the news from subsequent months, whatever is available, in October month in particular, is generally even better than what was in the third quarter of the calendar year 2020. So I think we are on the way to recovery. There are things to be done. The government needs to take action to accelerate, but that's something we can talk about. But I certainly think that we are on the way to recovery.
So if you're saying that we are seeing growth coming back, my question to you is, what really is driving that growth?
One thing that I've said for quite a while is that this is not a crisis that came endogenously from the economy itself, right? Some of the crises, most of the actually economic crises are generated by economic mistakes that have happened. That was not the case here. This was a completely exogenous shock. The virus came from outside, literally speaking, and it then shocked both demand and supply. And as the threat from the virus recedes, vaccine becoming available very soon, workers will be able to return to work, given that the exogenous factor which caused the crisis itself will now begin to recede. We should recover.
I want to talk about business resilience and what you think that small businesses should necessarily build in if they're really going to withstand the kind of external shocks that COVID-19 has brought about.
Look, Sunanda, I'm an economist, and these are issues that entrepreneurs would themselves know the answers to. And, for each sector, for each type of entrepreneur, there is a different prescription. Broadly speaking, pay attention to where the economy is headed. I think that's very important. Explore all avenues to finding financing for you. For the smaller enterprises, particularly, credit is a very important key. So that's something that they have to continue to explore. But other than that, I think, the entrepreneurs are closer to the situation. They know their sectors better. They know their own situations better. And I would really think that, they ought to make those decisions.
Since we have you with us here on the show, Mr. Panagariya, I do want to talk about any wish list that you may have for the budget. It's not very far away, compared to where we are standing right now. What would you like to see in the upcoming budget? If you could, put out that wish list for the government, what would you like to tell them?
Apart from the usual that goes into a budget, which is really the revenues and expenditures, those are something that the government will be working out. I can speak to the reforms that we need to do, and hopefully some of these will come in the budget speech. First and foremost, what we need as we come out of COVID is to ensure that the banks are there in sound position to expand the credit At the end of the day, financial sector is extremely, extremely important because finance really is like the lifeblood of the economy. And I fear that, we already went into this crisis with some stress in the financial sector, large volume of NPAs. And probably, some more bankruptcies would happen. It'll happen, because they will happen in every other country as well because of COVID related factors. The revenue flows had stopped for quite a while. And so I think, the government needs to recapitalize the banks in advance. Rather than wait. We made that mistake in 2015. Writing on the wall was very clear at the time, at least to me, that we needed to recapitalize the banks on a larger scale. We did not do that. We waited for quite a while and all. I think this time around, we should not repeat that mistake. So that, I think, is one of the most important things that the government really needs to do coming out of COVID. And I think, the government should be open to this time, at least a little bit of fiscal stimulus. I'm generally conservative in this matter myself, but given the current circumstances, an extra 1 to 2% of the GDP in economic stimulus will actually be a good thing. It will give the economy a bit of a lift because now the workers are going to be returning to work. They have been returning and more will return. And so therefore, giving the demand a little bit of support can give you results. I mean, I did not think initially when people said, in March, April, that we ought to have United States-like fiscal stimulus. I think the government was right at the time because there was no scope for supply response because of the lockdown. And so the government did the right thing at that time. But I think now workers are returning and therefore some demand support can help.
I want to talk about the PLI scheme, sir, and get your thoughts on the impact really that the PLI scheme is going to have, at least, to get your thoughts on whether the intended benefit, that is the boost to the domestic manufacturing space, whether that's going to happen, because a lot of people, a lot of experts commenting really on the headlines from the PLI scheme, pointing to the fact that it's all going to be in the implementation, of course. Technical experts in each and every sector, in each and every aspect will need to be appointed if the government wants to ensure effective implementation. I want to get your views.
Implementation, of course, is very important. There is no doubt. Integrity of the process also has to be ensured. And therefore, the proposals that come in to take advantage of the subsidies that are provided have to be, examined by those who understand. That's sort of a straightforward matter. My issue really on this is that we need to be sure that, we get some large-scale manufacturers entering as a result. At least traditionally what we have done is, we have these performance criteria that we lay down and they tend to be sort of different for foreign firms and different for domestic firms. Generally, like if it is in terms of the turnover annually, then there will be a lower threshold of turnover for the domestic firms than for the foreign firms. Or if the threshold level is in terms of investment each year or the life of the incentive system or incentive scheme, then there's a lower threshold for the domestic firms than for the foreign firms. In my opinion, that defeats to some degree the purpose. We want our domestic firms to be also large. I say this with the knowledge that, we are heavily dependent in terms of employment on very low productivity micro and small enterprises in terms of the aggregates, and in large number of sectors where we ought to have a lot of employment, the labor intensive sectors like apparel, footwear, furniture, light manufacturing, etc. These are all dominated by these micro and small enterprises, not enough large enterprises. And then if PLI also sort of encourages domestically the firms relative to the foreign firms, smaller ones, then they are looking to the domestic market only. And in the end, the efficiency is going to come from being being a player in the global economic, global marketplace. And so, these thresholds should be for us also on a larger scale. Let the larger players come in. This is what we lack today. I mean, it's not that, the larger enterprises are only the kinds of enterprises we ought to have. That's not the point I'm making. The current situation is that we lack large enterprises in a large number of sectors.
Yeah.
particularly the labor intensive ones. And therefore, we ought to really have kind of, demand from our domestic firms the same size that we
Okay.
expect the foreign firms to have. So that's my kind of one reservation I wanted to express in the design of the schemes.
Sure. So I have to take a very quick break on that note, but we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow. And tonight on Leaders of Tomorrow Icons, I'm in conversation with Arvind Panagariya. This is a criticism and an argument really that has come up several times in the past, that a country like India should not be perhaps laying so much emphasis on the manufacturing space, but should be promoting the services sector. I would love to get your thoughts.
I think that's wholly misguided. Because, you got 40%, 42% of your workforce in agriculture. You got overall about, 85 to 90% of your workforce in these very, very low productivity, low value added enterprises per worker. How are you going to bring these workers into gainful employment? You think that the financial sector can employ these people? You think IT sector can employ these people? The employment intensity, particularly when it comes to low-skilled workers, which is what we are talking about when we think of 500 million workers in India, is extremely low. Our leading services sectors, when we are thinking of the startups, we are thinking of the software industry, we are thinking of the financial sector, which are the sort of leading financial sectors. They cannot employ these workers in a large scale. So our services sector is going to actually employ. Some maybe in transportation, some in construction. I think those are good. I'm sort of all for services sectors that provide good gainful employment. So construction is a good services sector. Transportation to some degree is too. But without really conquering the global markets in manufacturing, how we propose to provide gainful employment to such a large workforce? We can otherwise create two economies. We used to think of talk in the old days of this dualistic development, where one part of the economy is very modern and the other part of the economy is totally disjointed from that modern economy. But that's not what we want. We want all workers to have gainful employment at a high productivity and relatively decent wages.
So for businesses which are in the services sector, tourism, hospitality, aviation, etc., what should they really do, sir, in your opinion, if they're going to really ride out the next couple of months, and if they want to see growth really coming back, what should these businesses do?
Well, I think for these businesses, the hospitality industry, the restaurants, the tourism, and so forth, at a loss, mainly they need a bit more patience. But at the same time, I think the recovery will happen. Vaccine is just around the corner. And this is where, again, the government interventions could be actually extremely helpful, if the government could move in with the vaccines more rapidly. I personally would think that, let's say if the AstraZeneca vaccine is approved by the British government, I think we should go ahead. I don't think we should be conservative about it. What you want to ensure is safety of the vaccine. Efficacy will vary, but as long as you meet the 50% threshold, which by all reports the vaccine does meet, we should move in aggressively. We shouldn't wait. I think we go too slow in terms of our own approval and so forth. But if the British government generally approves it, we should proceed, because this is the one which we actually have access. This is one vaccine where we have the lock on about 500 million units. So we could proceed very rapidly. So that's one thing, and once people can begin to come out, then the hospitality industry, the tourism industry, the restaurants, to some degree even transportation, they'll all get revived. Absolutely. You take, for example, the civil aviation. At one time, it really looked like, something was, civil aviation will never come back. And the stocks, even in the United States, of the airlines had really tanked badly. But all that is not turned around. So I think, we a little more patience, given the fact that the crisis was entirely due to the exogenous factor. As that exogenous factor gets dealt with, I think, the sectors will come up.
I want to pick up on that last point that you just mentioned about the financial sector and talk about NPAs for small businesses. Data showing that NPAs the middle of this year for MSMEs was at about 12.8% compared to 11.4% on a Y-on-Y basis. Would you be concerned? It's not a sharp spike, but it's a spike nonetheless.
We need to tide over the current crisis, of course, and the government has done, in the Atmanirbhar Bharat package that was announced in May. The government did announce actually very extensive steps to provide credit support. And so that was actually well done. Nevertheless, there are some enterprises which really are not viable in the long run, and they ought to be allowed to go out of business because, energy in the economy comes from both entry of new and vibrant enterprises, but also the exit of non-viable enterprises. So where enterprises are non-viable, you should let them exit. But the days, in general, you see the small and micro enterprises flourish when the economy in general flourishes. And that is where I'm generally optimistic that, look, once we get out of the current slowdown, which I think we will, as workers begin to come back, future generally is good. We will begin to grow in the post-COVID era at 7 to 8%. We did that, in the first 5 years of Modi government. The growth rate was 7. We grew at 7.4%. So it's not like, it's really that 1920 year when growth rate really dipped to 4.2%. But I have no reason to think that that is what will remain. I think we will return to the 7% plus growth.
You're saying, it's good that certain businesses are allowed to exit, and that's necessary for the economy. I want to talk about the linkage between productivity and wages. What's your view really on perhaps what wages are going to be going forward into 2021, particularly in the manufacturing space, given that we're working in this new normal in this post-COVID era?
But you see, this is where everything else that I have said matters most. Okay. When I think of wages, I think of the wages of the large number of workers. Unless we really try to bring them into higher productivity jobs, you can't raise the wages. Wages follow productivity, and for that you need to bring in change. Improve the ecosystem for the emergence of medium and large firms. And when you look at countries where let's say about 75% of the workers are in medium and large enterprises, the small enterprises also pay much higher wages. That's simply because the labor market for the small enterprises tightens. When 75% are employed in medium and large, then the smaller enterprises have to also compete in the labor market against those enterprises. Okay. And that forces them to become more productive. In our country, the large enterprises employ something like no more than 10% of the workforce. So there is huge slack in the rest of the labor market, and therefore the productivity, there is no pressure on the enterprises, micro and small, to become much more efficient. Jobs that can be done by one worker, they get done by three people. You get somebody to do the plumbing, fix the plumbing in your house, and whereas one plumber could come in and do the whole job, typically you will see in our country, 2 or 3 of them will come in. Sure. Largely the job of the remaining 1 or 2 work, the one person fixes the plumbing, the other 2 are just entertaining him while he does the work. And why does that happen? Because, there's so much slack in the labor market, wages are low and so forth. So, everybody has to do a little bit of something to make ends meet. But that doesn't pay very high wages. So sure. If we bring in medium and large enterprises in larger numbers in the labor intensive sectors, that's where the problem is. Sure. Then we will create good jobs, and we would also then bring up the wages in the small and micro enterprises. You see, once the labor market tightens up, all enterprises will have to become more productive, will have to shape up.
Okay, my last question, sir. What perhaps has been your biggest learning during this time of the pandemic, and what insights could you leave an entrepreneur watching tonight's interview with?
I would say, remain ready for the unexpected. that will not happen a lot, but occasionally in a lifetime, it will happen as it has. I wouldn't worry too much about it because, this is the kind of thing that has happened only once in 100 years. So don't overdo on the fear aspect of it, but, be a little bit more cautious than we may have been in the past.
Arvind Panagariya, thank you very much for your time here on the show.
Okay, thank you, Sunanda.
Completely out of time on this episode. If you have any feedback for us, though, we love hearing from you. Our contact details is up on the screens. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.